go to the special agenda. Also, we have 5 items in closed session, and we'll go to closed session in the back of the chambers. And so, colleagues, if we can get on the, first of all, let me start off with one card on general public comment. Mr. Kramer, Ural Kramer.
Don't start dancing.
Yeah, this is regarding the DOT eliminations and reductions of service. And I've been, I don't know if I handed this in, so hopefully each of you has a copy of these 2 pages. Yeah, and so these were just some of my thoughts on how to save some of the service and generate revenue to save it. As far as the fare increases that are being proposed, I feel that they're inadequate, and the fares could be increased by more. I personally don't have a car. I use public transportation, and I would be willing to pay more to retain more of this service. And I know other people who feel the same way. So I think it's kind of ridiculous that they're proposing to go from a quarter to, to phase into 50 cents over 2 years. I think it could go to 50 cents right now, and then it could go to $1 in a year. And I'm not talking about senior disabled. I'm talking about everybody else. And also, the weekly, the monthly, so forth. The Commuter Express could also be increased more than they're proposing as well. And I think you should compare it to MTA, what MTA charges. They're going to go to $1.50 right now for each ride, and Dash often saves me two MTA trips and saves me time, and other people as well. Let's see. The parking meters, the period of time that people have to feed the parking meters, I think could be increased. I know near me, the commercial streets that I live near, 3rd Street, there's a lot of restaurants. People are parking at those meters, even valets, late at night. So I think that can be done. And there's more ideas in here. I hope you retain this and read it carefully before tomorrow's meeting. Thank you so much.
That item was approved on Friday's agenda, but we'll make sure your comments get to LADOT. The only item remaining on the bus service that will be coming back to council before July 1st will address the issue of the charter buses. So that entire item was approved Friday.
The fare increases, the ordinances are on tomorrow's agenda.
I know, but the approved increases were approved Friday. The ordinance will replicate that approval. Thank you. All right, that ends public comment, and we have a couple of cards on individual items we'll get to when we get to those items. Also, colleagues, if we can consent on 11 and 12, it deals with 11 deals with an achievement, and 12 deals with some surplus radios. We can address those two. Okay, we move those 2 items. All I'd ask on item 11, if in preparing in several departments, we have CAO to address this. Several departments deal with achievements, but if you could have them in the future add in their narrative the overall cost of the process of achievement, and also the dollar value that we're spending on the advertisements and things of that nature. Okay, so we'll move those 2 items. We then have items 1 through 5. We will recess and go to in the back of the room for those, and then come back and deal with items 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Good afternoon. I just had a couple of questions. What was the final allocation that came forward for the 10-11 budget on our outside counsel?
It was 3.2 million and $50,000.
Okay, so that's for 10, 11.
Yes.
And then let me ask on these, I believe there are 15 contracts that are part of this report. Were we able to achieve any cost reduction on any of those 15 or as a group?
Yeah, Councilman, yes, and Haley, City Attorney's Office. Absolutely, we were. I mean, in fact, you'll note also that some of the contracts, we were able to revert prior year appropriations because of savings or even bringing some of the matters in-house. And then on the contracts that are yet existing, through our continuing invoice review, their savings, and we track those savings. And we have shortened the span of some of those. And the two cases with Myers-Nave, the Las Lomas and Monterey Hills cases, as you know, are resolved. So there have been cost savings measures across the board, actually, which have...
Do we have a dollar figure on the renewed contracts for these 15 that are mentioned in this report? How much of reduction in costs we've achieved? As far as the overall, I think we had a request citywide that contracts be reevaluated, and before reinitiating that we try to achieve a 10% reduction.
Well, as you know, the $500,000 that we've been able to save from the set aside for this year has actually come about across the board, you know, as a result of cost savings measures. And then you may also, I don't know if you're referring to, but be aware that we have requested of all of the outside counsel firms to take a 15% actually reduction in their billings, which...
Maybe, let me ask you, in this report that's before us on item 6, are we asking for a number of contracts to be renewed?
Yes, actually, some of them additional funding, and a few of them extended in time when the matters, if it's necessary to conclude the litigation. There are a few of them that we needed to extend the terms so that the firms can continue to assist with the litigation in which they're involved.
And these allocations that are listed on the report are retroactive. They've already done the work.
Not in all cases. In fact, the amount we're requesting today is to actually cover the work that is needed through the end of this fiscal year. And those numbers are arrived at based on budgets that we request. And remember, each of the law firms is requested to complete a budget with their projections, in this case, through the end of this fiscal year. So the amount we're requesting today will cover the needs of our current contracts through June 30.
Okay.
Councilmember, if I may, the request before you is asking for funds that are set aside in the UB to pay for existing outside counsel invoices. And so the 14 contracts that are before you, those are amending existing contracts and adding a certain amount of money to them to either close out the case or to pay for outstanding invoices for this year.
Maybe I misunderstood. So the term that we're extending, the term of 15, is to allow them to complete the case.
Oh, you're talking about the workers' comp, are you, Councilman?
I'm talking about item 6. There's a comment in here that the city attorney is also requesting authority to extend the terms of 15 contracts, 11 of which provide outside counsel on workers' comp cases.
Yes, so that's right. There are 11 that are
Item
workers'
F,
comp,
yeah.
and then 4 that are the not. Probably one, in fact, is an FLSA case. So the 4 are, our regular general funded, city attorney funded contracts. Those require term extensions, either to pay outstanding invoices or because the work is continuing. In one case, it's an FLSA matter. The 11 workers' comp contracts need to be extended because in some cases we still have the final. Remember, we have 3 installments that are paid on workers' comp cases, and we need to have a contract that is active in order to pay the final installment.
Okay.
So in some of those cases.
That's what I want to clarify. So the money we're asking for is to cover work that's either already done or that we project will be done between now and June 30th. These are not the contracts that we let for outside counsels in general, where they're on the bench waiting for work.
Correct.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to clarify what this money is being spent for.
This is real projected, either
Okay.
already covered,
All right.
expended amounts.
So these are already, like I said, but these are the contracts just to continue the work or
That's already been
completed work
completed.
or work projected.
Yes.
All right. Any other questions on item 6? Okay, we'll move item 6.
Thank you.
Okay, item 7, the CO report relative to the declaration of the 2009-2010 Special Parking Revenue Fund surplus and corresponding transfer to the reserve fund.
Before you get started, we have one public comment. Mr. Livingstone.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. I'm addressing the transfer of the special parking revenue funds to the reserve fund, the balance of those funds. The council passed a motion back in December, approved a motion in December to direct the Department of Transportation to report to it on a study for Pacific Palisades Commercial Village to revitalize the village and potential parking structure in view of the dearth of parking around the business district. There's been millions of dollars collected from parking fees in the Palisades Village area over the years, with none of that having been replaced. Based on the latest report I got from 2 years ago of parking, we can estimate that probably be $1 million a year in parking fees collected from the village. It has been suggested that to implement the council's motion for this study, that fees be reserved from the Special Parking Revenue Fund for this study before the surplus is determined to be transferred to the reserve fund. It would be expected that a revitalization of the village and a parking structure, possibly a multi-purpose structure, would significantly increase the revenues to the city. Therefore, it would be a great investment, increase the revenues of the city from parking fees and from taxes. And we ask the council to, or your committee, to reserve those funds. Approximately $100,000 is estimated for such a comprehensive study.
Thank you very much. Can we have city staff up?
Which one is it for?
Good afternoon. David Harana with the Office of the CAO. Before you have a report from our office recommending the transfer of surplus monies from the Special Parking Revenue Fund.
And would you comment on what fiscal year that you're making these requests, so there's no...
It would be for 2009, 2010.
Which ends June 30th?
Yes.
Okay. All
Correct.
right. So it's not for next fiscal year?
No, not for next fiscal year. For 2009, 2010, the recommended surplus amount is $23.46 million, which is $2 million short of what was budgeted. And the amount is required to help us close the current fiscal year and to avoid reducing the balance in the reserve fund.
Okay. And these funds were basically projected throughout the fiscal year. This is not a new request for an allocation.
Correct. We projected where we thought, or how much we thought we could get in surplus in the construction of the 2009-10 budget, and then during the course of the year, we monitored the revenue and the expenditures in the fund and came up with a actual surplus amount, working with Department of Transportation to make sure that it truly is a surplus.
And also, would you explain as far as the write-off of the, what is it, 19.6 million that's requested write-off, as to basically explain regarding that's a bookkeeping issue as opposed to $19 million having been spent and not repaid?
Correct. It is a bookkeeping issue. In the 2008-2009 budget, we had created a direct appropriation from the Special Parking Revenue Fund to the Department of Transportation in the budget. After that was created, we were advised that that was not the proper way to do things by the city attorney. So we submitted a subsequent report suggesting a correction to that. The council considered it, but they did not consider it until fiscal year 2009-10, after the books had been closed on 2008-09. So the Department of Transportation did not have the opportunity to make the adjustment, and it generated the creation of a reserve fund loan. The $19 million was provided to the Department of Transportation, spent during 2008, 2009. In 2009-10, the council took the appropriate action and moved the surplus money. This is just hanging out there. There's no loss of money. There's no impact to DOT in doing this.
Okay. And also, when the transfer or the surplus was identified for 09-10, it was based on what was currently the ordinance at that time?
Correct.
Okay. Question?
Were there any, I look at some programs and monies that were surplus, like $500,000 for no longer needed replacement parts and tools, et cetera. Were any of those related to our meters that aren't working? I mean, that's a lot of parts that weren't ordered.
That is a lot of parts. When we worked with the Department of Transportation, we were looking at prior year appropriations that were not been spent. So when we construct the budget every year, we work with them to try and come together with a reasonable, practical appropriation of parts and supplies, salaries and so forth. So the department agreed with us that this was truly a surplus.
But these were parts that weren't used, or they were just over order, we didn't order because we didn't need them?
These are appropriations that were never spent.
They never spent them. So we've got all these parking meters that aren't working and they didn't have the money to fix, and that we're giving it back because they didn't spend it?
I don't know if they didn't have the money to fix, but there were no orders placed against the money. The money was not used.
Well, that kind of begs the question, what's happening out there on the streets then? Because we got, all this empirical data saying we have a large amount of unworking parking meters, and we got money we're giving back to the budget, which I thank you for, but if it was allocated for parts and service, and then we got all these meters that don't work, what's going on?
Good afternoon, Amir Sadati, Assistant General Manager, LA DOT. That's a great question, Councilmember, and I think through time we have to kind of go back 2 years or so. We began a pilot program. As you recall, this council gave us the authority to change out about 18% of the meters, and the plan was to then go and change out the rest and do an RFP, but the P3, the privatization consideration, came into play, and the department was asked to kind of stop that work. So as the budget in these 2 years came across, we really weren't able to spend those monies because there was a decision to be made. Are we going to do an RFP? Are we going to change out? Are we going to sell our assets? So that's where... So
the decision was made then, instead of repairing broken meters, to just sit and wait until the council made up its mind what it was going to do?
Some of these monies were in, as David mentioned, in prior appropriations. Yeah. So it was enough to do the O&M, but in a general sense, to go and spend large dollars amount to change out complete systems, that would have taken us to do either a competitive bid process or do what we just did.
I'm just talking about the ongoing maintenance of the system, which is thousands of broken meters and lost revenue to the city. So you made a conscientious decision, or you were told to just quit fixing them until the council mayor made up its mind what it wanted to do?
We continued to fix meters. We continued to replace parts. We did all of that. These are some additional funds that were in prior appropriations that we weren't spending, because now we got the council to approve a 10,000 brand new meters. So we started implementing new meters that take credit cards.
Yeah.
Our older meters didn't take the credit cards and all of that.
And that's a great success, and I've been a big proponent of doing more of that and getting rid of those old meters. But in the meantime, how many meters do we have in this city?
We have about 40,000.
40,000. And we've only replaced a couple thousand with the new systems, right?
Well, back then, 2 years ago, we didn't have the direction to do an RFP to change out the entire system. We couldn't go and just replace 2,000 at a time. That decision was not made.
And I'm not talking about the replacement. I'm talking about the ongoing maintenance of the 40,000. And we have plenty of data saying that we have, what is it, 18%, Bill? 18%. Go ahead. Sitting there, broken meters that we're not collecting revenue on. And we've had money to fix them, and we didn't fix them. And I mean, the question has to be begged, where did the disconnect happen between the lack of a policy from the council and mayor and you guys doing the ongoing maintenance just to keep those running? Because there's revenue lost to the city. So we don't have an answer to that.
I think a direct answer to your question is we never stopped fixing meters. We continue
And why is there
to
18% still down?
because
And
there
we're
are
giving
too
money
many.
back for folks.
There are too many of them. There's still a lot of broken meters out there, and I think that the recent decision, as you said, a success is to change out 10,000 of them. We changed out another 18% through the pilot programs. So we've gotten to where we are, regardless of whatever decisions or lack of decisions that we have received from this council regarding P3. So we have done that. And these were, again, additional appropriations that was sitting there from prior years that wasn't, monies were spent. These were just additional monies that wasn't spent. And maybe David can probably explain a little bit better on the additional monies, but we were spending monies to fix the broken meters.
So we over-allocated?
In recent years, there was, I don't know if it's over allocation, we did put a little bit extra in as a contingency. But one of the hopes is as we move forward with this modernization of the parking meter system is that the requirements for replacement parts is going to go down, and that the success of the system and the new meters will be such that they'll break
I'm
less.
totally on
That's
board
one
for
of
the
our
future.
hopes.
It's today and yesterday that I'm really concerned about, that we're losing revenue because our meters aren't working. We haven't gone forward. The mayor and council have been fighting for a year and a half over this whole issue, and in the interim period of time, we've wasted money we could have used for repairing the 18% that Bill's been screaming about for a year and a half. It was there, and we didn't spend it.
Yes.
I'm not going to beat that horse because my colleague did it so eloquently. I am terribly frustrated by all of that. We've never, ever said put the meters on the block like the parking structures. We always talked about repairing them and expanding them and so on. I'm not going to go there. It just upsets me beyond, and I'm afraid I might get a little emotional about it. I want to talk about Dick Littleston and the Pacific Palisades, okay? As you know, since I came in office, I've been wanting to put together a parking structure in the Palisades. And as you know, the Pacific Palisades, a village within our great city, in 2006-07 brought in $274,882. In 7-8, it was $279,935. And in FY 8-9, it was $414,000. As you can see, it's up to date. We don't have the data for 9-10, but well over a fresh $1 million in the last 3 years came out of the Palisades. Palisades has been talking about years and years of a parking structure. They've now formed a great committee that was doing it. We've talked about it last year, you and I and other members of the DOT staff. I'm very excited about it. The monies necessary to do the study are a critical element in getting a structure into the Palisades. Palisades gives a lot of taxes to this great city in every way, shape, or form. We just got rid of the 430 bus, but tying it into the 431 so we could be more efficient with that particular rapid transit. And if some of these monies are unspent, what is our ability to do this study, maybe in-house or contracted to one of our employees about to leave that might not? Are there any opportunities to scrape it together before we put this in the general treasury when we see monies that no needed to purchase this, no longer for that? I'm seeing a lot of good dollars there. Any comment on how we can move forward with the Palisades dream to become a reality?
Councilmember, if you so desire, we can program that study into 10-11. I think when the council adopted a budget, they did leave a little bit of surplus in the 10-11 budget, and if you'd like to get your colleagues on the council to go along with that, we could probably program that in the 10-11 budget.
Can I make a motion for that in this committee that would then go forward?
Sure.
I'll make that motion. Do I have a second, colleague? For 2010-11, they have some money set aside. It could very easily be programmed to do what I need to do in the Palisades for that study. And he's willing to see that for the next year.
I think we have a larger issue, and one of the things that may help us on this is that, could we ask the CAO on how much special parking revenue funds came into, or is being used or being diverted into the 10-11 budget?
As I recall, there were, I don't have the exact number with me, but I believe you had $10 million that was, a little over $10 million was of surplus that was plugged into the 10-11 budget.
What was that for? Because I thought there was,
We had originally set aside in the capital program.
okay, but I think the council rejected that.
Right, you rejected the allocation in the capital program, and so it should remain in the fund available
Okay, so, but that's what I
for
want to get
future
clear.
allocation.
What I understood, there were no special parking revenue funds declared as surplus for the 10-11 budget.
It is the $10 million that was part of the budget that was declared. It was taken out of the CIP and was put in for a transfer.
Okay, so that money, okay, that's something new. The money that we took out of the capital projects was put into the budget as a transfer, a surplus?
Yes.
Okay, now, what did that go into?
Would it go to, I think it went into, it just became a general fund receipt, went into the larger pot, if I recall correctly.
The thing is, one of the things I think is important is that, and I'll be talking to Pete later on today, that so that we can get for this coming year, 10-11, that we will redo that Chapter 7 ordinance that deals with the transfer, because I think what we've done in the last 2 years is to ignore many of the needs that are in place. We've been consistent to address the bonds that we owe and we pay, but the maintenance and ongoing recovery, and that's why we put the motion in about the 5-year rolling plan. We want to clearly identify the specifics in this fund that have to be paid before you can declare a surplus. And then also, we want to make sure that if borrowed, that is paid back. And so that, what our goal is for 2010 is to, 10-11, is to have all that in play for this fiscal year. And so that's one of the things, because I think in looking back, we have historically downplayed the need of maintenance on meters and parking lots and the need for parking out in the communities for feeding the general fund. And the only way to resolve that is to create the ordinance that makes it a payback and really identifies clearly the needs of these assets before a surplus can be declared. And so that ordinance for this fiscal year will address those concerns.
Councilmember Rosendahl, to address your comments, definitely we've been talking to Pacific Palisades. Actually, my staff has been in multiple meetings, and I think one stumbling block right now, or an issue or a challenge, is finding the location. There is not a synergy within the community itself to find a location. So the study, I think whatever motion you have, we can promise to continue to work with them, but the study is just a study, and it might sit on the shelf for 3 to 5 years, because then you're going to need SPRF monies to build that. So I just wanted you to be aware that we have been working with them, but there isn't a location.
The Palisades would like to have some hope and appreciation for who they are and what they've done over the years and their desire to move forward. Finding a location will even be more enthusiastically received when they know that the opportunity, once they find a location to do a study, will happen. That's why I put the motion out there. Can I have a second for that motion?
Second.
Second for Mr. Parks. Great. Thank you.
Mr. Kretz. Oh, you're over there? We saw it. Okay.
Yeah, so where are we getting this money from, the $100,000? Oh, I'm not sure what the motion was. What's the motion?
Mr. Rosendahl, would you repeat your motion?
The motion's pretty clear, is that what we're doing is, as we get a location, whatever time frame that happens, that would trigger the opportunity to do a parking study that then could get that project on its way. People in the Palisades are tired of not getting the appreciation just to do the study. That was one of my determinations to get that opportunity moving forward. They've met many, many times with DOT. People are excited in the Palisades about finding a location. The Palisades is an area that people like to go to, and parking is a huge issue since it's such a beautiful little spot in our great city. And a parking structure has long-term been a suggestion from the community. What we have done most recently is dialogue with staff of DOT and with the community. And my motion basically says to reserve that opportunity to do that study once a location is found.
So, so are you allocating any money through this action?
$10 million parking.
No, the thing is,
No.
he's requesting they find it, but it's during the fiscal year 10-11. So he's just asking them, if I understand the motion.
Yes, and my understanding of the estimated cost is on the low side, it'd be 50,000, on the high side, 100,000, somewhere in between there.
So the motion is to request CAO to identify funding for this study.
That's how I understand it.
Within the context of DOT, which is obviously the driver of this for us.
Mr. Weiswell, you have anything else?
Yeah, that's fine. I just, yes, that's fine. I assume whenever that funding is identified, that'll come back to us, and
Yeah,
we review that.
certainly would have to. Sure. Mr. Koretz? Okay. On this item, again, we want to make sure that it's clear in the sense of what these funds have been used for. This is clarifying and addressing decisions made in 9-10. We came up 2 million short, so we had to address that during this fiscal year. But the new ordinance for 11-12 or 10-11 is something that will be forthcoming as a part of as part of Schedule H. Okay. All right. Let me see. Any other questions, colleagues? Okay, we could move that item number 7.
Thank you.
Actually, if I may, if we can go back to item number 6, I just wanted to clarify for the record, the CAO, drafted a report regarding the request for appropriation for outside counsel. In our report is basically recommendation number 5. I just want to make sure we can clarify for the record. It says authorize the city attorney to amend the term of contract number 109849 with Liebert, Cassidy, and Whitmore from April 1st, 2006 through March 31st, 2012.
12 instead of 10?
10, that's correct. And those would be consistent with the city attorney's recommendations as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this will take us to item number 8, which is the city attorney report and ordinance relative to the creation of administrative lien program to secure and collect unpaid tax assessments owed to the city.
Okay, could we have the city attorney and representatives from Department of Finance?
Deputy City Attorney Dan Whitley, good afternoon.
Okay, could you, as the city attorney, could you walk us through this ordinance, and we want to make sure there's complete agreement between city attorney and Department of Finance as what this ordinance does and what it's going to achieve, because it's taken us so long to get here. We just want to make sure that once we sign off, it's going to do exactly what the intent of the Department of Finance.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts in what
Okay.
we've drafted. Okay, so 21.150 as amended would start off in O subsection I to fix that the amount of any tax, interest, and penalty will be a debt to the city, and if not paid when due, it will be a lien. By defining it as a debt and a lien, it simply quantifies what the legal effect of the liability will be. 21.150 subsection i then provides the Director of Finance with the authority to record liens against property to collect the unpaid taxes. The only liens that are authorized by this subsection will be against property used in connection with activities generating the tax. This lien ordinance will not allow a general lien against all property of the taxpayer, only against property that generates the liability. So, for instance, if it's a business tax liability, it will attach to assets used to generate the business tax liability. So, for instance, it would attach to accounts receivable. If the business owner owned the real property and that's where the business is located, it would attach to that real property. But if the business owner was an individual and also owned a personal residence, it wouldn't attach to the personal residence. The reason it's drafted in this manner is to avoid the holding of Isaac, an earlier case in which the City of Los Angeles lost a case where we tried to essentially have a judgment lien that attached to all property, and the court ruled that was preempted by the state's general lien laws. By narrowly drafting this, we hope to avoid the reach of Isaac and have a constitutional lien provision.
And as you mentioned, property, that also includes checking accounts and such.
Anything related to the generation of the liability. So for business taxes, it would be accounts receivable, it would be inventory, it would be anything of that nature. Now this 21.15 is referred to by all of our taxing provisions. So if it was transient occupancy taxes we were collecting, it could be a hotel owner that owns the hotel. It would be anything of that nature.
Okay. All right.
Subsection little I, provides that it provides due process to the taxpayer and says that prior to recording the lien, the Director of Finance shall provide a report to the City Council with the taxpayer's name, the amount of tax, interest, and penalties, and the tax period for which the taxes are owed. And the matter shall then be placed upon an agenda for hearing.
Let me ask you, that's one point I have, does that presuppose that it's coming through committee first, or are you saying it goes directly from finance to council?
We drafted it to go directly to council to make this be as quick a process as possible. Mm-hmm. We could have it go to committee. There's no requirement under state law that it go anywhere.
Okay. The thing I was concerned about is that if you say it's going to council for hearing, whether all of the issues have been addressed before it gets to council, or is the council going to be put in a position to go through a whole hearing process and hear information for the first time?
That's what it would, as it's drafted now, it would all be heard at council for the first time. When we met with Office of Finance, their concern was they didn't want a long, drawn-out process. Yeah. So we were trying to have only one hearing where the taxpayer would appear and be heard once, instead of having the taxpayer be heard, for instance, at Budget and Finance, and then have it be then heard at council again. We could have it only be heard at Budget and Finance, for instance.
Yeah. Well, I'm just concerned because we know that we get appeals from everything from brush clearance to everything else, and committees pretty much eliminate a lot of stuff and bring clarity before it gets to council. And I don't, particularly when you get in disputes, I can just imagine coming to council without a clear recommendation that it would go back to committee anyway. I'm just concerned that we try to find a way to clarify, just as people dispute their overpayments and things of that nature, or underpayments, or their audits, they flow through a process that when it gets to council, it's pretty well vetted by the city attorney, the department, and a committee that says this is what we recommend.
I agree with you. So we'll draft it as you direct.
But I would hope that we could do something, again, not slow it down, because nobody wants to slow it down, but the actual hearing, because it's coming out of finance, would come to Budget and Finance and then direct it to council so that it's a recommended of 5 members, or of at least having some recommendation from a committee.
We could set up that process as well.
All right.
The subsection also requires that the request for approval of the lien not be made unless the city attorney has determined that there's a sufficient basis to support the liability and that there's assets that the liability could attach to. So this subsection requires that there be some review by the city attorney's office, not to require that we be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt or anything of that nature, but just that there's some basis for the liability and that there's something we'll collect. And it then requires the Director of Finance provide notice at least 15 days prior to the hearing.
Okay.
Subsection 4 says that upon a majority of vote by City Council to approve the recordation of the lien, the Director of Finance may record the lien at the proper office, and then specifies the format for the lien. From the time of the recording of the certificate, the amount required to be paid will constitute a lien upon all property to which the lien can attach and to property owned by the taxpayer used in connection with activities. It defines the lien as a state tax lien and states that the lien shall continue for 10 years from the filing of the certificate of lien.
Let me ask the Department of Finance in the sense of what the department was reaching for. Does this cover the issues you're most concerned?
Well, the Ed Cabrera Office of Finance, the concerns that Finance has is we definitely don't want to have a cumbersome process where we're further delaying the collection and the attempts to collect. What we would hope to have is the ability to have a dialogue with city attorney to ensure that the taxpayers' due process rights are maintained, but also to ensure that the Office of Finance is able to utilize its collection staff to move forward with the lien process. One of the concerns that we have is we're currently in the process of having dialogue with both the City of Oakland as well as the City of San Diego in their lien process. Specifically, the City of San Diego utilizes their collection staff to process the liens. We are concerned with having to send all of the lien requests to City Attorney for review and approval. We are looking at San Diego's process, which they don't follow that same procedure. We understand the City Attorney's concerns as far as due process and the vetting issue, but we also want to ensure that the Office of Finance is able to move forward without having to have every step reviewed by City Attorney, and we're hoping that we can have an opportunity to have dialogue with City Attorney to ensure that a process is put in place where Finance can operate and meet the legal concerns that City Attorney has raised.
But let me ask you, doesn't it help the City Attorney if you eventually have to go to a judgment, that they have that prior involvement?
Yes, if it eventually has to go to judgment. However, the situation is what we're trying to avoid is not having to go to the judgment, which does drag out the process. I believe the City Attorney report does reference the potential to lose approximately 4 months on average if judgment does have to be obtained. So the end goal is to expedite the process to ensure that we're able to take action on those taxpayers that are delinquent as quickly as possible.
Yeah. No, I understand it's setting the lien on these people that are not paying their taxes, but I think the dilemma I have is that without City Attorney involvement, it appears that we put ourselves in jeopardy on the back end, just as I mentioned earlier, if we move forward on the liens directly to council, if somebody comes in and appeals them, it then slows the process down to then go back to committee in the first place. So I think what I'm trying to do is make sure we have the lien process, but that to be done as quickly as possible. And I would hope the City Attorney would have the same goal of not in any way slowing these things down, just like we wouldn't slow them down in committee. The issue is that having all the fail-safe mechanisms to make sure the system's going to work in its entirety. I mean, why do you perceive the City Attorney would slow it down? I mean, because last time I remember, there's several City Attorneys that are assigned specifically to the Department of Finance for legal assistance. Would you be dealing with a group other than them?
No, we would be working with the same City Attorney unit that currently provides us with legal support. We're not suggesting that the City Attorney would intentionally slow it down. We believe that based on our discussions with both San Diego and Oakland, that there may be a process where we can utilize the City Attorney feedback on a global scale so that we can set up a process where we don't have to send each individual lien request over to City Attorney to review. We believe that a process could be set up where we could set up the procedures within our collections unit to ensure that we meet and address those concerns that City Attorney has.
Let me ask you this. When you say send it over, is there a process that can be in place that it's being reviewed in the Department of Finance with City Attorney?
Not currently, but that would be, that is the direction City Attorney is proposing.
Because I would hope in the one city that we have that you don't physically have to send everyone by gray mail so they can look at it, but that you may have them in some cumulative form where you sit down with the City Attorney that's addressing them and deal with them in some kind of meeting and getting some verbal approval, as opposed to sending it through for a formal legal opinion. I don't think that's what we're looking for, is a formal legal opinion.
Right. Well, City of San Diego, based on our discussions with their collection staff, that particular unit within the treasurer's office in San Diego, their collectors basically have the authority to file the liens. They do the analysis, they do the review without requesting city attorney overall review and approval. So we're simply looking at having that dialogue with city attorney so that we can set up a process that is not overly burdensome and that would unintentionally delay our referrals.
Okay. Let me ask you one other question. Do you have a sense of what positive impact on our revenue recovery that this system might aid us in the future?
I don't have those figures in front of me, but we can certainly report that back.
Do you have any sense at all? I mean, I assume we're moving forward on this because we believe it will cause people to pay faster and get our access on funds. Have we assessed at all any dollar value?
I would have to check with our collections manager, but we definitely can provide follow-up.
Okay. By the time it comes to council, if we could ask you to have that information, it'd be important.
Definitely.
Okay.
Councilman, just to clarify, the city attorney would have no problem going to the Office of Finance's offices to review. We're not looking for a formal review process. We just want to make sure that there's some review by the city attorney to make sure that the liens are going to be valid. We have some ability to prove up our liability and to collect.
I would hope we'd be able to do that. Bill, you have anything? Okay. Jose, you have anything? Okay. Paul?
Yeah, just one question, and I know it's already had some discussion, but I'm not entirely clear on why our liens, why we didn't win this case and why our liens have to be on point. I assume at the state and federal level, if money is owed to a government entity, they don't only go after the opportunities that are on point. They try to garnish their wages. They go after whatever. So I'm not clear on why we as a city have to be limited to such a narrow on point area to place liens.
Well, as a matter of state law, when state law preempts the field of a field of law, our municipal laws can't interfere with state law. State law preempts the field of judgment liens and general collection law. There is a procedure the city can use if they want to use far-ranging collection tools, and that's to get a judgment lien and then collect against anything that we want. Then we can levy on wages. We can collect on any property that we deem fit. The city tried to do this in the past, and we tried to have a municipal lien that attached to all of a debtor's assets. We lost that case in Isaac v. City of L.A. And what the court held is that state collection tools preempt the city's municipal lien. It is directly like the lien that you're talking about. If we had a city municipal lien that attached to all of a taxpayer's assets, this case says this is simply a judgment lien, and the state law already has one. And the city is preempted from doing that.
Is there a disadvantage to the state for the city to be able to get that kind of a lien?
Well,
or is it just a quirk in state law that we could try to address through the legislature?
We could try and address that through state legislature and have the state give municipalities the opportunity to have their own liens specifically. I believe the way we drafted this ordinance gives us an ability to have our own liens, and it will allow us to do some collection activity. But that is a tool we could try and have the state grant us. I don't know what policy reasons there may be on one side or the other, but that's how the law is right now.
Right. It's not entirely clear to me what disadvantage there would be to the state in granting us broader authority. But I guess if this gives us some of that authority, it might make sense to try it first and see how much we're missing in not having the greater ability. But if there's no great harm to the state, I don't see why we couldn't try to sponsor legislation to try and loosen up our lien powers a little bit.
That would be fine. Can I ask very, very clear? Are you asking the city attorney to amend the ordinance to have the notice be directed to bring the taxpayer to the Budget and Finance Committee instead of City Council?
Yes. What I'd ask that we make that amendment that it come to Budget and Finance prior to City Council, so if there's a hearing or public comment or things of that nature could be resolved in committee as opposed to having a hearing with no vetting before council.
Okay, very well.
And then I think also we'd ask for a report back on Mr. Koretz's issue as it relates to that evaluation of the state prohibition and what may be the city's recourse in addressing that.
Okay.
And then let me ask, on with that amendment, when do we think this could be before council?
Yeah, he wants it to.
It's a very pro forma amendment. We can have that ready whenever this matter goes to council.
Okay. Let me ask, Maria, do we
I'm
have a
assuming
time?
that we have a few days, but
Okay.
yes.
Maria, do we have a time on when this is scheduled for council?
Not at this time. I can coordinate that with the city attorney.
Why don't we coordinate, because we've been waiting for such a while. Let's see if we can get it there as quickly as possible with that amendment.
What we'll do is we'll prepare the draft ordinance and get it in a day or two at most to the clerk, and then she can schedule it for council as appropriate.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thanks both the departments for putting this together.
Thank you.
Next item.
Okay, the next item is item 9, and if we can take item 9 and 10 together.
Yes.
There are two reports by the CEO, one relative to Standard & Poor's rating, and the other one's related to Fitz Communication.
I think if we just like to get your opinion from the CAO's office as to what impact these downgrades or negative watch has on the city in the future, near future, or distant future, and particularly as it impacts the possibility of trans.
Mario Vasquez with the City Administrative Officer. To answer your first question, we are actually going to the market this week on judgment obligation bonds. So after Wednesday, we will know the impact of having been downgraded by the 3 rating agencies since November 2009. So after this week, we can report back to your committee to give you what we know as the monetary consequences of being downgraded.
Okay. Now the Standards and Poor is what, a negative list, a negative watch and a downgrade?
Well, since November 2009, all 3 rating agencies, including Standard & Poor's, did downgrade the city by 1 notch.
Okay.
Specifically, this action or this item today from Standard & Poor's removed the city's negative credit watch and assigned a stable outlook. And Standard & Poor's took that positive action because the city did receive a delayed monetary transfer from DWP.
Okay. Colleagues, any other?
Actually, if I may, I would like to highlight that both of these correspondence from Fitz and S&P speak to the fact, it mentions the DWP transfer and delay in transfer, but it really speaks to low reserves. One of the biggest criteria that they look at when they rate us is our reserves and having adequate reserves to deal with issues. And so what had triggered these were certainly the discussion what we had prior this year when the reserve fund was going to be drawn down to very low levels. And this is what had triggered those downgrades. So I think we need to keep in mind and take note that we need to continue building our reserve fund and certainly get back up to that 5% level.
Okay. Mr. Koretz, any questions?
No, I just had a question about what we think the removal of the credit watch, if anything, how much we think that'll impact us positively, or whether that'll have any impact at all.
It will probably have a minimal impact, but we will know better at the end of this week after we do accept bids on our judgment obligation bonds. So we can report back to this committee. And Councilman, if I address your second question around regarding the trans, that is short-term debt. These downgrades were for a long-term fixed rate debt, so it does not affect the trans.
Okay, very good.
So the credit watch is a pretty minor factor because it's not an actual ratings reduction or
correct,
or
compared to the
removal of
downgrade. We received a downgrade with the negative outlook. The negative outlook was removed to stable outlook.
But we still maintain all those downgrades.
Correct.
Those that were not removed. Okay.
Mr. Weezer? Okay. Mr. Smith? Okay, we'll move items 9 and 10, but we'll ask when these items come to council if you can give us that report back as to the jobs.
The JOB?
issue. Yeah.
Yes.
So we make that a part of the presentation for 9 and 10 at council. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we are going to what, the special
The
agenda?
special, that is correct.
Okay. And let me, on the special agenda, colleagues, we have at least one item that has 7 parts to it, and so we'll deal with the pension reform issues first, and then the last 2 items after that. And the pension reform items are 13 through 17, 19, and 20.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead and read all of those items?
Yes, so we could just make sure everybody's aware of what's
Sure.
before us.
Item 13 is a CO to provide a verbal update on efforts to reform civilian and sworn pension systems for current and new hires. Item 14 is a CO to report relative to an assessment of the League of Women Voters report on the city retirement benefits, with a focus on a healthy percentage of contribution to the pension fund from the general fund, and comparison to the real contribution, as well as consideration of contribution levels for 5 years, as directed by council on March 10th, 2010. Item 15 is a Board of Fire and Police Pension Commissioners report in response to motion Koretz Parks Han relative to the potential benefits of and necessary steps to effectuate consolidation of the administration of the city's 3 pension systems. Item 16 is discussion on the status report requested by council on March 20th, 2010 from the CLA and the CAO relative to actions taken by the 3 retirement systems in response to a motion by council members Parks and
Ray,
Smith.
just one second.
Yes.
A technicality. Let me recess the regular
yeah,
meeting.
recess and go to the special?
Go to the special meeting. Now, you don't have to repeat all the things you just said.
Thank you. Perfect. Perfect. Motion by council members Parks and Smith under council file 09-1123 with an evaluation of the potential effectiveness of these actions and better ensuring that investment management decisions made by the respective retirement system boards are made solely on the merits of the investment opportunity, and a recommendation on the adoption of a policy that can be enacted which would either require disclosure from placement agencies or ban these third-party marketers from the decision-making process of these investment boards. And item 17 is a motion Han Koretz requesting that the CLA and the CAO prepare a financial analysis looking at the potential savings to the city from the various proposals suggested by city unions for pension reform, including preventing the practice of double dipping and capping annual pension payments. Okay, and then we also have item 19, motion Zion Parks, instructing the CAO to discuss with sworn and civilian bargaining units and to develop the requisite actuarial studies to enable placement of a charter amendment to the Fire and Police Pension Plan on the March 2011 ballot, and to enable amendments to the Los Angeles Administrative Code to effectuate pension plan changes for members of the Los Angeles City Employees Retirement System, LACERS. I think there's one more, looks like, item 20, motion Zion Parks, instructing the CAO to provide analysis of the report by the Department of Water and Power Retirement Plan Manager and a recommendation for bargaining instructions to the Executive Employee Relations Committee to amend the reciprocal program between LACERS and the Water and Power Employee Retirement Plan.
Let me ask from the CAO-CLA, are these all of the motions that we're aware of that are within the council committees and been authored as relates to pension reform?
I believe so. I mean, we can go back and check council file.
Because what we're trying to do is put everything under one number, because some of them are in conflict, some of them are asking different parts of it, and the concern is we'll never get a real package of pension reform until we can address all of them within one, under one umbrella.
As far as we know,
These
are all
okay.
of them, but.
All right. And let me just ask for one amendment on number 19, that we scratch the words not meet and confer, scratch the meet and confer, but just it's that it should be discussed, that we do not support having that language in that particular area. So we discuss it as opposed to the direction for meet and confer. Okay. Colleagues, on this, we've had a number of items. We hope that it captures all of the issues. What we wanted the city CAO to come back is to respond to the many motions, the studies by the League of Women Voters, but to come back and provide recommendations to the council to advise us also the limitations, whether there's a state law or whether there's a charter limitation, whether there's ordinances that we have to seek, whether there's direction for bargaining instructions, that those are the kinds of things we'd ask in reviewing these particular issues. I'd also ask the CAO, CLA, if we could, if any of these motions are in other committees, if we can seek they are waived so that that we're not taking pieces of this larger picture and dealing with it in another committee.
Okay.
Anyone else have any questions on, is this 18? Mr. McQuiston, you had a question, you had public comment on number 18? Oh, wait, no, wait a minute. No, 18, I'm sorry. We'll get to 18 in just a second. This is 13 to 17, 19, and 20. I'm sorry. 18. We'll be with you in just a second.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if I just want to clarify this, not that any of this in terms of who puts in motions means anything to me, but I've put in a lot of motions on pension reform since I've been on the council for 5 years now, and I've been talking about the consolidation of the 3 pension plans into one for a couple of years now. So we can give credit to everybody, but what I really want to see happen is the consolidation of those 3 and the money saved, and can it be done? That is, now you're calling 15 with Koretz, Parks, and Hahn's name on it, okay? That's one that I would really like to get that clarity on. The other has to do with a new tier. The bottom line is we need a new tier of pensions going forward for new employees. I've been saying that for a long time, and we know that only pension reform can happen with a new tier unless the sacred contracts could be broken through legal action or through a referendum of the people or whatever. But when I say pension reform now, I'm not going to fight the past, but I certainly want us to have a plan, and this again, I've been saying this for 3 years, about a second tier. I don't want another employee coming on the city's payroll unless we have a new tier in place. Okay, and then the third issue that I've been hammering since day one is health care reform. And I know I don't see it here, but we know for a fact that for every penny a city worker puts in, private sector are putting in 20 pennies. I mean, I'm talking the same people, people who have health care needs. So we got a health care crisis that has the structural deficit going, and we have a pension crisis. And I must tell you, I would say the last couple of 3 weeks, in every public forum I've been at, my constituents and constituents throughout the city are very, very upset. And they just don't understand the reality of the government, and people are losing jobs, services are being cut. But the pension reform aspect and the health care reform aspects have to be addressed, not pushed off for another year. And I don't want to hear another bureaucrat get in front of me and say, we have a structural deficit. And then I say, well, what does that mean? Well, the income doesn't equal the expenditure. Duh, I'm not 2 years old. I want to know, what do we do going forward with both pensions and health care? Can we consider that as we cluster these points?
Okay. Let me just comment on health care. That's already being addressed by the CAO and EERC bargaining instructions about addressing that issue.
That's great.
Okay, but pension reform, we had so many motions that we wanted to bring them all under one umbrella.
Go ahead.
And Councilman, the issue of consolidating the 3 systems, that was one of the ones that's item 15. That was subject of one of the motions. And then there have been a whole series of instructions given, and including most recently in the budget, to continue those discussions. So all the things that you mentioned, I think, are covered either through these motions or through the budget instructions.
Okay. Colleagues, any other questions on this item? Okay, let me just, if we can just give a couple of instructions on this item. Number one, if we could ask the CAO and the CLA to value or to search our files and ensure that all motions that are currently aware of are part of this evaluation, including amendments, budget memos, a variety of things that have been forthcoming. We'd also like to get some idea on a due date of what it will take to get back to the council on this particular direction. Also, in that report, we need a specific stating of our legal limitations, if there are any, from state law to charter change to ordinances to meet and confer to bargaining instructions, those kinds of things that we'd have to do to address many of these recommendations. And again, I mentioned earlier, if we can get those items waived out of other committees so they can all be under this CF number, I think it would be important. And I already made the verbal amendment to alter the wording on number 19. So with that, if we can give those instructions, Ray, what would you think is a reasonable timeline to report back on these 7 motions and the variety of budget memos and things of that nature?
Let it come back to you within 2 weeks. We'll put together basically, if nothing else, a timeline of some of the actions, and then we can report subsequently on the issues if needed.
The one thing I want to make sure is I understand there's also instructions given by EERC to CAO about dealing with pension reform. We would like to make sure that these documents are part of that discussion so that they're not working incompatible, that they're negotiating one thing and yet we have all this material that has been recommended. So if there's some way we can make sure that they merge together.
We'll make sure they're consistent. Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we'll move that item with those instructions. Next.
Okay, so that should take us to item 18, which is a resolution, Perry, Parks, Smith, and CLA and city attorney reports relative to the city's position on Senate Bill 1168, which would allow the Los Angeles County Superior Court to impanel an additional grand jury managed by the city attorney to investigate.
Okay. Let me ask Mr. McQuiston, you had a card in for number 18.
Jim McQuiston, you have my statement on this. I think it's pretty complete. I gave you 5 reasons why the city attorney's idea is a winner. However, as you know, I'm a pretty budget hawk. We do have a budget problem. So I had to look at this to see if it would impact the budget, and I found several reasons why it will not impact the budget. In fact, it might help out the budget. So I don't want to be a naysayer. I certainly approve the actions of our Budget Finance Committee, but I think that the resolution just needed a little more work, and with a little more work on it, I think you would take a look at my statement that I put in. I think it answers the questions. I think you'll agree with me that we'll let the city attorney try it for a little while. Yeah. He may not even use it, but at least he'll have that as a tool.
Okay. Mr. McQuiston, did you bring those comments today, or were they submitted prior?
They were submitted. I think you have a copy. I called this morning, and I think it was distributed. It was sent to the clerk.
I haven't seen that.
It's a 2-page analysis.
We'll see if we can find it, because I haven't.
Just in summary, I gave you 5 reasons why it's a good idea. I also gave you many reasons why the city attorney's letter to you was not really made very well.
Okay. All right, we'll find that document, so every committee member. Colleagues, this item is before ITGA to evaluate the city's position as it relates to support or non-support. This is in this committee on a very narrow aspect of cost analysis and also the impact on the budget. The dilemma I have, and I'll ask Ray, being that we do not have any analysis as to what a grand jury cost and how many grand juries we may be going through, what I'd ask is that we punt this back to ITGA and whatever clarification on dollars that you can put forth for them as they do this analysis. I would not like to hold this in committee because this thing is moving through at least the Senate already and it's on its way to the Assembly. But we do need the ITGA committee to evaluate the city's council's position. But whatever we can come up with cost analysis in the interim would be of importance when they schedule their next meeting. The thing that I think I would be concerned with is that we have no identified revenue source to fund it. We have an unidentified usage, and we have an unidentified cost of what this may impact. And so those are things I would be concerned from the budget and finance, but again, not having knowledge of how many and how extensive, it's difficult to make any assessment in that regard. And so, colleagues, we have any other comments? We can just, yes.
Voting on this item today, you're waiting?
We're sending it back to ITGA and ask the city CAO to provide and gather whatever financial information that they can gather, that when it's reviewed at ITGA, they would have that available.
But we're sending it without a vote being taken or not taking a position?
We're not taking a position, no. That's not why it was sent here. Okay. So we can then, basically with that direction, send this back to ITGA and ask the CAO to provide that financial information.
In addition to the financial, I would like to ask, and I haven't had a chance to read this document because we just got it, if the city attorney had given us any alternatives in there, like why don't you just use the standard grand jury system where you can go to them and ask them to look at something? Why don't you use the city's own council's authority to subpoena information? And, you know, you didn't look at, I don't think you looked at alternatives. Why didn't we go to the voters of the city of LA and ask them if you wanted this versus a state law that only affects one city in the whole state of California? So I don't know if they're in those kind of questions, but I'd like those. Those are policy decisions for that committee, not for this.
Correct.
So I'd like you to address those when you get to ITGS then.
And we have, and we'll comment on them further when we get back to that committee. Be happy to do that.
Because the point is that we're making right now is it's going back to that committee, but I really would like a compelling discussion of the reasons why and why it makes sense, why we need that extra teeth and all that somewhere within this process.
Yes, and we believe we can make that presentation to that committee, of course, and we will provide some of at least the preliminary cost information that we have to the CAO as they get started. We'll work with them.
And if there's additional monies, Mr. Chair, could it then come back to budget for us to have a second look at it?
I think the dilemma I have is that it looks like it's moving so quickly on time that we can address that when it gets to full council.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Cool. So we'll move that back to ITGA with those directions to the CAO to try to recover some cost analysis. Thank you.
I think it's this one here, yeah. Okay, that takes us to our last item, which is item 21. It's a motion, Parks Garcetti, instructing the CAO, CLA, and city attorney to report on all actions necessary to implement the 2010-11 adopted budget.
Okay, could we have the mayor's office, also the CLA, the CAO, and the city attorney at the table, please? This is 20. Making progress. We have the city attorney. The reason that this is on the agenda is that we are getting very close to the start of the fiscal year. The budget was just, I think we have one remaining item on the budget which we'll address tomorrow. But we really would like, as a committee, to get some insight as to all of the issues that are in the budget, whether what progress we've made to make sure we can implement as of July 1st, whether it's Schedule H, Schedule I, or Schedule II, and what the dealing with ordinances, whether it's dealing with sufficient information to personnel department for the layoff list, whether it's addressing a variety of issues that were part of budget memos. And so that's why we wanted to just get a briefing and discussion of where we are today. My understanding that June 16th is a relevant day as it relates to notices going out, and we're very close to that date. Let me ask the Mayor's office, Reverend Carr, to start off with a presentation as to the Mayor's position on this year's budget as we move into the last few weeks.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Parks and other members of the committee. I've been meeting weekly with the Personnel Department for the last 3 months, specifically related to the layoff process and the calculations. And so we meet actually every Monday morning with the Personnel Department. And then we've been communicating very closely with the CAO's office around the budget issues related to the layoffs and the displacement. So presently, we've completed, as you know, there have been 90 people actually who have actually lost their jobs in this current fiscal year. And then the Personnel Department has been doing a number of calculations related to that. And so there are letters, there are 391 letters that have already been issued to coalition and non-coalition, all city employees, for either layoffs or displacements that would take effect July 1st that will go out, are prepared to go out by July 16th. And then there's an additional 287 positions that are slated for elimination that the Personnel Department will be doing calculations on in terms of additional layoffs and displacements. So they are working on those regularly. We expect that there'll be 25 of those letters will be ready by next week, by the June 16th deadline. So we should have over 400 of those letters ready to be effectuated by our general managers. And then they should be able to complete the calculations, and I'll let Phyllis talk about that process during the first quarter of the fiscal year. So our plan right now is that we will we'll be sending out a memo on behalf of the mayor on Monday to the general managers, unless there is some breakthrough with labor in terms of concessions between now and then, and we will be instructing the general managers to actually effectuate those layoffs and displacements, that they actually have letters in hand to take effect on June 16th. At the same time, we have we've already processed 386 employees have actually been transferred, completed, and then we have some other transfers that have actually are in the process. We have about 17 additional transfers that are in the process right now, and another 25 job offers have been made for employees who are on the list to other special funded departments. And then
let me just ask one thing on the transfers. Are those 300 to proprietaries? Are they interdepartment general fund? Are they intra-department general fund?
It's a combination of departments, as I understand it. It's moving folks mostly. 299 of the 386 are actually moving people who were all on the general fund to special funded or proprietary departments. And so what we're obviously, the whole point of this is to try and move people from general funded positions either to proprietary departments or special funded positions that have been left vacant largely because of EREP, the Early Retirement Incentive Program. So we're trying to backfill those positions with people who are currently in our city employment so that we can maintain the 6% or less backfill portion that was done in terms of the actuarials for the pension plan. So we're trying to push as many people as we can within the classification. So we're not trying to fit, square pegs into round holes in terms of classifications, but where appropriate, we're trying to actually make those kind of transfers so we can fill the department needs and still maintain the backfill rate in terms of the actuarials.
Okay, thank you. Let me just express one concern I have, is that I think we feel pretty comfortable with transfers into proprietary departments, and they have appeared to have put forth a great deal of effort to determine whether they can absorb. The transfers I'm concerned about are those that are on general fund departments that are interdepartment and also intra-department. And understanding that we have cut these budgets significantly, that there's two issues. One, that general managers are not allowed to take in positions that they either do not have the funding or the positions for. or that they create a significant drag on the special fund positions because they have deployed more people than they have authority to deploy. And so those are the areas that I'm most concerned with, because they will all leak out into the general fund during the fiscal year.
Well, we were concerned about that as well. So on occasion, when we would send out, we would ask for information related to the position eliminations, and then we would get responses back saying, oh, those positions are no longer on the list. We would actually then respond and ask, well, by what authority, or wonder why are they off the list? Were they put back in the budget? In some cases, they were just put back in the budget. In some cases, there was a verification by the CAO that in fact there was money in those funds. So we have not, wherever there's been departments that have responded back and said they had more positions available, we've always gone to the CAO to actually verify that, to ensure that in fact the money is in there, because we have the same concern you do, that we would, if we don't effectuate these and we're putting people on special funds that actually don't have the money, that eventually it's going to be hit on the general fund. So we double verify that every time we get those responses.
Okay, very good. Any other comments?
No.
Okay, let me ask from the CAO, and then we go to the CLA, and then we ask the city attorney. Any comments?
If I may, I'll jump in first at this point. We have been certainly looking at the positions. I know personnel has been looking, been worked with departments along with the mayor's office. We have been asked as far as transfers, whether or not there is funding for some of the special funds, and we provided comments accordingly. Certainly, we are, I guess in stepping back, we do have concerns. We've been looking at departments and looking at their positions, their regular authorities, their resolution authorities, both on budget and off budget, and then applying assessments as far as salary savings rates. And there are some big concerns in some departments. I think many departments do believe that we will authorize substitute authorities and other mechanisms to carry employees forward for another year. But unfortunately, I want to say, as we go through the assessment, some of the numbers are going to change for departments. Some departments may have been a higher number and have come down, but they actually may go back up. Our review at this point has just been looking at the actual authorities and what have been approved, but we're also now in the process of actually matching up the dollars and whether departments actually have the dollars, and that's the next piece that where we need to go through and do an assessment. And we may find some anomalies there and some issues with departments. So sort of just in summary, as we go through the position authorities and then start assessing the dollars that are available, I think we're going to see some changes in some of the numbers that have been presented, and quite frankly, some departments may have to go back and reevaluate just what they're going to have to do and what their next steps are going to be.
Okay, let me just ask, will we get more clarity in the upcoming FSR?
The next FSR is going to talk about this year. It will highlight a couple departments as far as issues for this year, but we do plan to come back and continue assessing the dollars and positions for next year as well.
And when will that be published?
We're continuing doing the assessment. We'll be happy to give you another verbal update next week.
But on the FSR, when do we plan to publish that?
For this year, we hopefully get it out probably tomorrow afternoon.
Okay. This week. So we will have that on June 14th?
The 14th, yes.
Okay. All right. Let me ask the CLA, any comments?
In order to implement the adopted budget, there are a number of different areas that need to be looked at and tracked. One has to do with the revenue, both in terms of, and this is more the city attorney can comment on implementing the ordinances that will affect some of the revenue projections that are in the proposed budget. Also tracking other sources of revenue that have an impact on the number of positions that the budget can support in the coming year, and what might need to be done later on in the year if those revenue sources don't come through. There's also what's already been discussed, the actual budgets and what positions can be filled by departments, what what services they're providing, the resources they need to perform those services, and what funded positions that they actually have, because it'll be important for as we go through the managed hiring process to identify only those positions that are funded for departments to fill. And the sooner we can identify what departments can work with, the better for them, because they really need to know what they have to work with in order to do what they need to during the year. And then there's also a number of reports that the council has requested in conjunction with the budget. I think what we'd like to do with the CAO and the city attorney and the mayor's office is identify priorities and some order in which we want to take care of these things. We need to deal with the revenue, we need to deal with the department budgets and what they can support and so on.
And let me ask from the city attorneys. Yeah, this is really just a
Yes, our review of Exhibit H indicated that there were 31 ordinances requested. We have transmitted 11 of those ordinances and are working on a priority basis with the departments to transmit the rest of those. Some of those will require more time than the fee ordinance, for example, and we will work with the departments to do it as expeditiously as possible. They may not be done this month, however. Among those that we're giving some priority to, but it's turning out to be a larger analysis than we anticipated, is the transfer of the land records function from the city clerk to engineering. There were a number of other code sections that were impacted, and we've gone through that search, and there have been a couple of meetings already to resolve that and to get the ordinance back as quickly as possible. But we are working as diligently as we can to get them to you quickly.
Okay. And let me ask Ms. Lyons, on personnel resources, the information that you need to cause June 16th to be a reality?
We have the information we need now from departments. They've requested layoffs for 287 additional positions from what we previously had.
Okay, so you're getting cooperation?
Yes, we are.
All right. Colleagues, any questions on the status of where we are?
Just curious about the total number of layoffs that are planned over the next, let's say, 90 days as you go through the processes.
Well, according to our numbers, we've been working with personnel. There are 90 of the 391 letters that have been issued so far. 90 of those actually are people that have been laid off, and so there are an additional 55 that will be displaced. So they've been displaced. They're not being laid off, but they will displace someone else. There would be an additional, I believe it's 246 that are actually presently right now would actually be leaving city employment effective July 1st, and then how many additional ones come forward through these additional 287 positions that they'll be doing the calculations for. And just so you know, there's actually 78 different class groups. I've learned a lot about this process in the last 3 months. There's 78 different class groups that require calculations for layoffs and displacements, and so we instructed the personnel department to start with the ones that we knew were easiest to actually do the calculations, so we could maximize the amount of time we had to get as many calculated by July 1st. But now we're starting to get into the more complicated ones and different classifications. But once we start, they work their way through those, as I understand it. Phyllis can talk more about this. It starts out slow, but then it gains momentum over time as they start those calculations, and the displacements are all done. Then it starts.
So you're basically saying 246 right now.
Right now, letters in hand. General managers have a letter in hand with instructions to on June 16th to notify employees that as of June 30th they will no longer be employed.
And then the additional 287
is the ones that the personnel department is in the process now of doing the calculations.
Okay, and then when the calculations are done, do you have any sense of a time frame on that?
Well, our plan would be to handle those the same way that we've handled the non-coalition bargaining unit employees this year. As we received the calculations for those, we instructed the general manager to lay them off. So once we hit July 1st, there will be no deadline in terms of waiting until a certain day. So we would probably continue to meet weekly with the personnel department, and as they show us that they've finished calculations, we would instruct the general managers to move on
Do you
that
expect
immediately.
additional besides the 287, or that's it? And that caps that off at roughly 500 or 520?
I think that would be over 600, but that's what's left to calculate as we understand of the positions that were eliminated in the budgets, that we found out on April 19th that there were positions that actually had bodies, real people in those positions.
Okay, so saying that we're looking at a potential total of 600 people.
That would be that's the realm of possibility.
Okay.
But as you know, each time when you start doing some of those calculations, then some people get displaced and they displace to another
I understand,
position.
and when we get into the empirical data on some of this reality, are we going to list which departments that comes from and what services might be impacted by this? Will we get that clarity of what this will mean?
Yeah, the list that I believe the mayor's office that we released on the 20th had, it listed all the positions that were going to be eliminated by both classification as well as within each department. And so we actually were discussing that this morning. We will, on Monday, when we issue a directive to the general managers to go ahead and to actually effectuate the process on the 16th, we're going to say, within your department, here's the 4 different classifications that we've done calculations for. Please move to effectuate those layoffs effective June
because
30th.
anecdotally, for instance, DOT, there was going to be a community meeting of some sort, and DOT said back, we're not going to be able to do that meeting. We're in the process of removing people from this, that, and the other. And I get every day, of course, people about the libraries and people about the parks. And when it comes to the libraries in particular, have we zeroed it in enough to know which libraries and which would be affected, which might have to limit their hours or not limit their hours? Or is that too much in the weeds?
Well, all of our general managers should know that, and I believe, in fact, in some cases, general managers discussed what some of those service implications were going to be during the budget process. I don't know the level of detail as to which libraries and things like that, but all the libraries, as I understand it, will be impacted on levels of service. My understanding is that we're, just because I talked to the head librarian about that some, I believe we're going to be moving from 6 days a week to 5 days a week in terms of service, and then juggling around what hours we're actually going to be open in various libraries, depending on whether it's a local library or branch library.
But what we were hoping, some of us, I know Mr. Labange and I were working on this, was to talk about volunteers in a different way and how volunteers might be able, if the reality hits and a job is lost at a given library, and we have a time frame of when that might happen. Be you in favor or not, the policy has happened. The mayor provided his leadership, and here we are. There's a tremendous desire not to cut back library hours or days, but to train volunteers to assist an on-duty librarian in some of the tasks that might keep the library. I'm not saying it will yet, but I'd like to not just shut down a library in the evening or on a weekend if we can put together a plan that is a public-private partnership for each of the libraries, and maybe the community groups that are willing to sponsor and work. But it's that kind of thing, because obviously I don't want to see a single librarian lose a job, nor a single library closing its hours or its days. But if that's where we're going because of the rubber has hit the road, can we somehow have a time frame with a potential opportunity to work through this volunteer strategy? And we have 30,000 volunteers with the parks, where some of them are officials who do games and things. But the ability, if we can, to provide those services with a hybrid strategy rather than, a librarian who's on a city payroll is the only one capable of doing anything, and these volunteers are sweet, nice people, but they're volunteers. That is not an attitude that I have.
Well, I do know that in our office, Rafael Gonzalez, who's been working on volunteerism within the whole city, has been working on a volunteer program. We specifically have tried to target some of the retirees, particularly in classes like you mentioned with librarians or classifications that are very special, to see if we might recruit some from that pool of people that have retired to actually be volunteers. Now, I will say, though, from my perspective, just in looking at this once a week, July 1st is the date there are going to be service implications, because we are going to have people, unless there's some dramatic change in the next 8 days, we are going to have people who are no longer going to be employed that presently work for the City of Los Angeles, and that there is no way that our departments are not going to be able to have some sort of service impact. The degree to which that impact is relevant or is actually felt by the public is going to vary based on the department and where those departments had to make those reductions. But there are going to be service reductions. There's no question about that.
But I liked your glimmer there about retired librarians and maybe others in both parks and libraries that offer special expertise that maybe could be marshaled up. We created all kinds of corps in this great nation of ours in troubled situations, like during the Great Depression. There were all kinds of projects and opportunities, and I think we should appreciate the talent in our city, because obviously I don't want to see an employee lose a job, but if that's the only strategy to balance the budget, then we're there. We've gone through this process as a group, so no one's trying to deal with that. But the downside might not be all these services cut back if we more vigorously move forward with partnerships with retirees or even people who might have been laid off that might come back in some kind of a way where they feel what they were doing made sense in a volunteer. It's a combination of obviously the job, which is so critical for every one of us. I mean, that is the most traumatic thing that we can go through besides losing a loved one or situation within our lives. I understand that and appreciate it very much. But I also believe that the future of this great country requires an educated public and intervention and prevention strategies that are key also. So if we can take the challenge and actually come up with some of this discussion. We passed a motion to go forward with it, Mr. Labange and I don't want to look at you in 6 months and say, Councilman, I'm sorry, but and I said, well, did you try this here or this there or so on? And where we can help, our offices can help, or people who contact us, we'd also like to be engaged in it.
Sure.
Councilman, I was going to add that you just mentioned the motion that was passed for both recreation and parks and libraries to look at volunteer programs and to report to council. It would go through Arts Parks Committee. And then with regard to the library hours, there was also a motion that because of the reduction in hours, there was a motion to have some discussions with council offices to ensure that it may not be the same days or same hours in every single library, and that would be discussed as well.
Very good. Thank you.
And Karen, you may mention also the UB allocation to stimulate volunteerism. We put some dollars.
There was a $500,000 allocation put in the UB to look at a volunteer program to market or advertise a volunteer program.
And just so you know, Councilman, that we are actually at our last general managers meeting, we asked and we expect to receive in the next few weeks operational plans from all of our general managers in terms of how they're going to operate their departments given the cutbacks and given the reductions in staff. So that will also help us understand more clearly the impact on services.
Okay, great.
Just one thing on the layoff projections and whether it's, I came up with 533, you say 600, you may be counting that other batch of people, whether it's 500 or 600, it's still short of the budget plan was 756, I think it was. So is that projected for a August, September time frame to hit the rest of those layoffs?
Yeah, the 287 is the additional positions that are eliminated that now the personnel has the letters from general managers saying, please calculate the layoffs for these positions. Now, when we get those, again, the other thing I've learned from this process is that, it's a moving target because you have people that are transferring, you had people that retired and stuff like that. So it's a snapshot at any given time. So my expectation, just given the past history, is that of the 287 that are left, that not all of those people are going to be laid off or displaced because some of them are going to transfer. In particular, we've actually seen the transfers start to go up as people really believed that in fact we were going to potentially lay people off, it seemed to increase the motivation for folks to consider
But still, numerically, if you take the 246 you're seeing we have now, and the 287, which is the next list, that's 533. That's short of the 756.
Yeah, because, 90 have already been laid off.
Okay. So
And then there's additional people. We've actually transferred 386 people as well through that, in the process.
Okay, so the transfer out without backfilling is...
That's correct.
Part of your, I thought that was in this year's budget that we did that.
Well, some of those have been transferred presently, but some of those ones that were transferred they're in this year's budget, but they were in anticipation of next year's, those positions being eliminated. So the positions were identified in our budget as being eliminated effective July 1st. As soon as people saw those positions were going to be eliminated, then they started looking for transfer opportunities. So some people transferred in essence in advance of their position being eliminated because they saw the handwriting on the wall.
I thought those eliminations were in this year's budget midterm calculations to get us to July 1st. Then the 756 is in the July 1st budget. So it sounds like you're double counting 300 people.
Well, as I understand it, and Ben can speak to this, in our budget, there were over 3,500 positions that were eliminated.
Those were last year.
No, that was...
ERIP?
Those were a combination of ERIP.
Yeah.
They were a combination of what was in the mid-year financial status report.
Right.
And they were in anticipation of what we prospectively looked to eliminate for this next fiscal year. Is that not right, Ben?
As you recall, when the ERIP position, when the people took the early retirement, those positions were not eliminated mid-year. So the budget for next fiscal year did that cleanup, so to speak. They, as we prepared the budget for the 10-11 fiscal year, we looked at those vacancies created by ERIP and did the technical deletion of those positions. So while the position may have been vacated sometime this current fiscal year through ERIP or some other transfers, those positions were still within the departments. And so it was through this budget process that we eliminated those positions.
But we calculated the mid-year corrections based on the ERIP on a partial year's funding. So they really were counted in last year to get us to the end of the year. We counted them already. So you're not counting them going forward. What was in the budget was 756 new eliminations that were not in last year's mid-year corrections to get us to the July 1st date or June 30th date.
Councilmember, we had the same kinds of questions, and so we wanted to make sure we were getting the cooperation that Councilmember Parks referred to. So we worked closely with the CAO's office, and we have been working closely for a couple of weeks trying to get an accounting and some large numbers that explain part of that in addition to what's already been stated. There are 88 positions in street services and public works, for example, and those individuals, rather than be laid off, are going to be placed, and we've been working with street services to do that. Some of that money is aura money that they're relying upon. So that's an example of 88 positions that are accounted for. I hate to point it out, but there were 77 positions in the personnel department because of the workers' compensation issue. Those are no longer being removed. And then there were some add-backs in animal services, I think approximately 13 positions. And there's a few more here and there.
Okay, so the bottom line is the 756 in the budget really was never 756 because you had all these adjustment factors.
And if you recall,
final budget reconciliation,
it's always a snapshot in terms of what positions were filled. So we knew the number of positions being eliminated, and to get to the number of positions that were filled at the time, it was a snapshot based on what the departments were informing us. And as the year progresses and more people took an ERIP or more people just retired through regular retirement, that number could have come down. And there was also, as Jeff stated some transfers to special funds and to proprietary. So it was a snapshot at that time.
Let me just add, I think one of the things that we've all come to the conclusion is that although the media and a lot of people zero in on layoffs, the real issue is dollars saved and number of positions cut, which may include layoffs, because the layoff number is one that gets us all in a bind because everybody wants it in concrete, and it's not a concrete number. So I think positions cut and dollars recovered are the two numbers that we have to address.
You are absolutely correct about that, because the other is a moving target. And frankly, I mean, we've been pushing hard to transfer as many people as we can to save as many jobs as we could, because We want to see, it's not our goal to put people out on the street. Our goal is if there is a job that someone is qualified for that's on a special fund or in a proprietary department, it's in our best interest in the city to retain those employees and to move them into those positions while still achieving the savings. And in fact, if we can transfer someone or get, it's cheaper. It costs us less money than it does actually to lay people off. So it's in the city's best interest from a fiscal perspective to transfer as many people to positions that are funded off the general fund. It's in our best interest to do that, which is what we've been really pushing our general managers and the personnel department to do, to try and maximize the savings.
Thank you. That's correct.
Yeah, a couple comments. One is a follow-up on Mr. Rosenthal's comment in terms of library services, which is, I think there's no doubt that where we replace trained professionals with volunteers, we'll be getting much weaker service. But one of the key points is when we look at this as a public safety issue, just keeping libraries open an extra day and having kids have a place to go, it has a certain value in itself, and I think that needs to be contemplated along with everything else. So if we're open a Saturday with a lot of help from volunteers where we otherwise would have been closed, the fact that we'll be providing much weaker service, I think shouldn't be the only consideration. I think the fact that we're providing any service at all on those days has a certain amount of significant value. Question as far as how our negotiations are going, as we're talking about the last few days, are we focusing more on just getting ready for layoffs, or are we actually still making strong efforts to try and come up with alternatives, working with our labor partners?
Mr. Chris, I think that's more appropriate for the CAO, but in closed session.
It would be, but I will say that I think we're making every effort that we can to come to some resolution.
Can we say even very generally publicly whether we're making any significant progress or not?
I would be hesitant to.
Okay, I will pass on that then. In terms of what we're looking at with coalition layoffs, what's the number of layoff positions that are purely coalition that we're talking about at this point?
Well, it's a number that's not done being calculated yet. So so far there's over 200, nearly 250 letters in hand that I know of that are for sure coalition numbers, and then there's these 287 calculations for positions that need to be calculated today. So of those, we're not sure yet how many of those will be layoffs or how many of those will be displacements, but they're in the process of doing those calculations.
So of the first 200 odd letters, are those all coalition members?
Well, there's actually 391 letters that have been issued. 90 of those were non-coalition units, and those people actually were laid off. Then there's an additional 55 people that have been displaced. And so of the folks that are left where there's letters in hand, there's over nearly 250 that we know of are coalition.
And what's our current figure that we're using in terms of where we break even by laying off coalition members?
You know, that's really a question for the CAO's office. They're the ones that are doing the calculations in terms of the budget.
What's the number I'll ask that of the CAO's office.
Yeah,
then. What's the number we're using currently?
And that's an answer for closed session discussion.
Even that? I think we've discussed that publicly previously.
I don't know if I don't recall whether we've had a detailed public discussion on that.
Well, my understanding is that we're within shooting distance, at least, of losing money on layoffs when we do that as a first batch of layoffs. So is there any reason why we would make that small number of layoffs so that we would be not yet even breaking even, but by engaging in the first layoff, guaranteeing that we owe the coalition $30 million plus in raises?
If I may, I think a couple of things. Right now, certainly personnel is working with information that's come from departments. the CAO is in the process of what I'll call validating some numbers, both on position authorities but also dollar reconciliation. I will say, just as an example, not to call any specific department, well, I'll just call them out. City Attorney, for example. We show them as being over quite a bit as far as positions, not having sufficient dollars to pay for those. Majority of those would be, I think, part of what fall under sort of the coalition. Those numbers haven't been included in any of this discussion. We also haven't included in discussion as far as needed employees. And there's a significant number of as-needed employees that will be let go as well. In Rec and Parks is really the big pot of folks. So at this point, we're kind of looking at sort of the full bodies, I'd say, full-time folks, but there's still some pots, some groups of people that actually we haven't had, that hasn't really been discussed too much publicly. The city attorney being one, and also the full range or the full contingent of as-needed folks that will be asked to go away as well.
So those folks don't need the letters that we're talking about?
The city attorney, there's a separate process for the city attorney, and then as needed, it is a different process as well.
Well, I don't know if folks are in agreement with me, but I would, as we continue to try and negotiate with some of our units, it seems like it would be premature to make these layoffs when we're not at a point where there's enough of them to actually gain budgetarily. Certainly if we do, it's only by a hair when you add in these other categories. So I would hope that we don't act that quickly until we know for certain that this will actually be something that winds up being a net gain financially for the city.
Mr. Kretz, I think one of the things is that these issues and triggers were put in place when we approved the budget, and I don't think we can ignore that there's a potential 1,000 more if other revenues aren't forthcoming, and that the issue of the negotiations might impact some of the budget. But I think when the mayor came here several months ago, I don't think there's a scenario that we've come up with that doesn't include layoffs of some type or continued cutting positions, which may include layoffs. So I think that the council put in place by voting on the budget that July 1st is inevitable, that there's going to be pink slips given, and that as the CAO, CLA work through, along with the Personnel Department, positions that will be transfers, positions that will go to special funds, proprietary departments, that layoff number may fluctuate, but it will not disappear.
Well, and I guess the only question I would have is if those positions have been eliminated in the budget, then our general managers don't have a position for someone, then they have no choice but to either transfer them or to lay them off.
That's right.
So those positions, unless those positions were reinstated somehow, or a sub-authority or something like that, which there's no action, that would require council, as I understand it, council action and mayor concurrence to actually, those positions are eliminated. So if someone is in a position that's been vacated, then we are forced to actually deal, our general managers are forced to deal with that situation. I think that's correct.
Yes.
Yeah, you're correct. And if I could also just, I mean, we've had this discussion before, and it's in the budget, so it's a done deal. But if there's this magic number out there that we reach at some point with a coalition that we trigger, and we got to pay them, and it's no longer, or it becomes financially more beneficial the more we lay off. And that's unfortunate. But when you reach that number, that's a one-year budget value. But the real value comes in year after year after year when you've reduced that structural deficit. So it's not just the one-year trigger and the dollar amount says it's when we hit this number, it's now financially advantageous to us. But if we're a little under it, so what? Because it's the long-range value that keeps giving year after year after year. And that's been a problem in this city for a long time, that structural deficit. And this is adjusting to that and fixing that problem.
Let me just, is there any other questions, colleagues? Let me just ask that we, I want to give some direction to the CAO, CLA. I'd ask that in many of the issues that Mr. Rosenthal brought up about the partnerships with libraries and volunteers are part of Schedule H. And because Schedule H has so many things on it, I'd ask that we put that on the Budget and Finance Committee agenda, and we could deal with that as a formal item the first meeting of each month until we resolve all those issues. I'd also ask that the CAO and the CLA take one more cut at the budget and ensure that all of the vacant positions that were cut and the sub-authority positions that were cut actually have been cut, and that people are not placing positions into authorities that no longer exist. The other issue is, as I mentioned earlier, concern about transfers. Certainly, transfers to proprietary departments, we have a comfort level, but I believe that there's a need of a process between the CAO, CLA, and this may not be the right term, but the managed hiring process may be replicated to verify transfers inter-department and intra-department to ensure that, again, we're not transferring people into non-existing positions, or we're not transferring them into special funds that are basically over TO positions. The other thing, we'd ask the city attorney to continue their effort to get those 31 ordinances done, and that we can, as quickly as possible, particularly those that are revenue generating. And certainly we'd ask the personnel department to get back with us if there is any lack of cooperation to move forward on your process. The final thing I have is that for the June 14th Budget and Finance Committee, we'd ask the CEO to bring forth our prior request during Budget and Finance Committee that we have the evaluation of the 1,300 to 1,400 Reso Authority positions so that we can get some sense of how many of those positions should be basically eliminated or moved off of the current general fund positions. My final issue is that the 90-day, I think we need some clarity, quick clarity on the 90-day contract issue. Many general managers brought this up as a solution to their problems during the budget hearings, not understanding that you need revenue in your budget to use 90-day contracts. And so we need some clarity quickly to address those issues.
There's also a larger issue related to 90 days that the CAO, CLA, Mayor's Office, and City Attorney are working on, and we'll be reporting back to you, I'm sure.
Very good. Colleagues, any other issues or direction? So we appreciate the discussion, and certainly with those directions, we will basically conclude this item. Any other items, Ray?
Nope,
Okay,
that is it.
Now, we're going to adjourn the special meeting and also adjourn the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee.